topic is the Rahit, and the historical Rahit. And what is this? The Rahit is the code of conduct that exists within the Sikh tradition. It governs everything from how to conduct a marriage, how to pray, how many times to pray. Everything is covered. Personal, communal, it's all there. Now, this is not a new or modern type of literature. It goes back in history. The earliest ones that we know of are from the 18th century, early 18th century. 8 manuals, in fact, can be traced to that time period. Now, what I will attempt to do here is to, first and foremost, review the assumptions that have been made in the English language, the scholarship on the Rahit. The second is to basically try to dissect the dynamics of it, and then try to launch a new way of looking at the Rahit. The leading scholar in Sikh studies in the West has been Mcleod, just like Simran said. And he's the first that I know of to publish in the English language on the Rahit. His first publication was called the Sikh Rahit, and it dealt with a specific manual called the Sikh Rahit. This existed in 2 dated versions. One, dated to 1764, was kept in the Golden Temple in the Sikh Reference Library. The second oldest was kept at Guru Nanak Dev University in Amritsar. It was dated to the 1850s. Now, you have to know some background here. Mcleod claimed that he had gone into the Golden Temple in the early 1970s, and that he sat down, took down the oldest one by hand, and that he published that copy, that handwritten copy. This is inaccurate. And why do we know this? Well, because he said so himself. The handwriting was done in New Zealand as part of the editing process. I urge you to take a look at page 1 of his publication, where he actually says that clearly. More importantly, it's not really true that it is the Sikh Reference Library version that he did publish. He says on page 22, he says, and I quote, after a long discussion on these 2 manuscripts, he says, "For this reason, the text presented in this volume is essentially that of the GNU manuscript. Occasionally, SRL reading has been preferred, but such instances are rare. The more important of the variant SRL readings are, however, recorded in footnotes." Thanks. Now, I'll leave it at that. No explanation needed. Now, the second book that he published was called Sixth of the Khalsa. Check out the sources. They're largely modern. Modern Punjabi, well, pretty consistently. Modern Hindi, published, unverified. Again, thanks. The justification for using these sources is that the bulk of the material was kept in the Golden Temple. It got destroyed in 1984. That's the justification for it. However, in the 1970s, a local scholar by the name of Shamsher Singh Ashok was commissioned by the Golden Temple authorities to make the manuscripts into transcripts. He just copied them straight off, turned into Gurmukhi transcripts. That's it. He's an interesting figure. He was commissioned by the Sikh History Research Board, which is actually in the Golden Temple itself. So he's one of the few people who was a likely candidate to have access to the entire collection. He was also a distinguished scholar. This man is published on everything. You can go back and just look him up. You'll find him everywhere. It's also interesting that it predates the attack in 1984. Now, what is important to remember is that Ashok was commissioned by the SGPC himself, so again, no problem to get hold of these manuscripts. Now, it's an interesting publication because it's not in a binding, it's actually like a file. It's been notoriously hard to find this stuff. And from what I've heard, don't quote me on this, but the transcripts were also apparently destroyed in 1984. I managed to acquire a copy of these transcripts, and they constitute the bulk of my doctoral research. So, how can we then take a look at this material and actually verify it? Well, there's a fairly simple way. Mcleod, who did see the manuscript, no doubt, says the following. The SRL manuscript owed its considerable distinction not merely to its 18th century origins, but also to the fact it was explicitly dated in terms of date and place. The colophon which concluded the complete manuscript stated that it was copied in Jin City and completed on Chet Sudi 14th, Sanmat 1821, 1764, 65 Common Era. Take a look at the underlined sentence. All right. So, it's at the top. You see 1821. That's a pretty good indicator. Second point. I have checked his publication. He gives 94 specific references to the SRL manuscript. I've compared them to the material I have. 90 of them are 100% identical. 4 of them are a little bit different. There's perhaps a word missing, or a sentence that's a little bit tweaked. But the overall structure is there. All right. This is, I think, as close as we can get to the Golden Temple material. I'm not saying it's identical, but it's very close. Okay. So, again, there are 8 manuals. 2 of them are dated. One in 1764, this is the one you're looking at. The second one is called the Nasihatnama. It was found in 1994, I believe it was, at the Mcleod University. It's dated to 1718. It's also the only one that's outside this particular collection. Now, what about the rest? What can we say about the material? It's written in pre-modern Punjabi. It's mixed up with Braj. It also has some fairly interesting Persian loanwords involved in it. They're also shorter, which almost by logic puts them at an earlier date. Now, the reinterpretation that I want to do, or the assumption that I want to make, is that first, what is the justification for anyone to follow their head? Okay, now, Mcleod talks about this at length, and he basically gives us the argument as follows. The main justification for following the Rahit is, of course, that the Guru himself authored it. You know, what he says goes. But the problem is that he says that it's a traditional narrative, Mcleod. He never gives us any source for this. He doesn't cite it, no quote, nothing. This is his assertion. Now, he doesn't agree with this. He doesn't agree with the Guru who actually produced the Rahit, but he acknowledges that there is a traditional narrative. So, what is the assumption? And what can we draw out of this assumption? If the Guru did write or authored the Rahit, we should be able to trace the origins of the Rahit to an earlier form of literature. That goes by logic alone, I think. Well, do we have a likely candidate? Yes, we do. It's the Hukamnama. What's a Hukamnama? A Hukamnama is a letter written by the Guru to a specific congregation or a person on a specific topic. It can be anything. It can be day-to-day stuff. Sometimes, no doubt, there is a Rahit sort of, it does touch on Rahit material, no doubt about it. But, what they're basically saying is that as these Hukamnama accumulate over time, there becomes a need to formalize it. And there's the Rahit. No one has, to the best of my knowledge, given this a name yet. So I have. I call it, it's a boring name, but I call it the Hukamnama hypothesis. Now, what's missing here? Well, the Hukamnama hypothesis has a few deficiencies. It's not because it's quote-unquote traditional, that's not the point. First and foremost, it favors linearity. For anyone who is involved in history, linearities should always be seen with suspicion. That's the first thing, just by default. Whether you agree with it or not, that's a different matter. But you can't accept it at face value. Secondly, it takes the historical context completely out of the equation. There's not a word about the social traumas of northern India in the early 18th century. Not a word about Nadir Shah's invasion. Not a word about the Mughal Empire escalating its oppression of religious minorities. Not a word about the Afghan invasions pounding away at the Punjab. There is not one word that deals with this. So what are we doing here when we accept the Hukamnama hypothesis? We're putting the Rahit in a straitjacket, and we're asking it to do a jitterbug that it cannot perform. It just can't. It's impossible. We're judging the Rahit according to the standard set by the Hukamnama. That's essentially what we're doing. And this is where I think that we should take a new perspective on the Rahit. We should try to see it in a little bit different light. If you put all the 18th century manuals, regardless of their date, side by side, in no particular order, and a Martian would land and take a look at this, as objectively as possible, what would this Martian find? Sure, there is a very didactic element, no doubt. It's instructional, yes, absolutely. But there's a lot more to it than that. It's not one-dimensional. It actually, I think, is a prime example of what I call memorial technology, because it talks a lot about trauma. I think that trauma and martyrdom is part of this narrative, and we've completely forgotten about it in scholarship. Let me restate my case. When the guru is alive and kicking, all you do is to follow the example set by him. If we have a leader of a community, Inder is the leader of our community, and we're supposed to be righteous according to standards, all right? We follow her example. If she goes for a 2-mile walk at 9 o'clock in the morning, so do we. There's a do and a don't immediately connected to it. Do what she does, don't any other way. Okay? So a 1-mile walk at 8 isn't going to cut it, or a 3-mile walk at 10 isn't going to cut it. It's that precise. Okay? Guru Gobind Singh dies in 1708, and he's not in the Punjab. And the earliest Rahit that I maintain are the earliest Rahit are almost always reflective. In fact, all of the Rahit are always reflective of the lost leader, the lost guru. It's actually about intimacy, the intimacy of a community. And I think that until we take this into consideration, we're seeing it in black and white, one-dimensional. We don't let it play. We're not actually listening to it, to be honest. And I think that that's a risk. So my ongoing research is to try as much as possible to bring these equations into our assessment of it, and to try to do a little bit more listening. Thank you.